Well, welcome students to another in the series of lectures to empty seats. I sure wish you all were here, but in the meantime, I am just really excited to talk about one of the most central concepts in conflict management, and that's identifying undesirable repetitive patterns. Okay, we're going to have a few videos that deal with URPs as the acronym spells out. I have students who affectionately call them URPs over the years. So what is an undesirable repetitive pattern? And let's talk about some of the characteristics, okay? So for instance, I'll give you a few examples. You know, URPs happen with people that you have known for a long time, okay? It's significant others, family members, longtime friends, maybe longtime colleagues, right? So it's really a pattern that's pretty much scripted. You can really predict, what that person's going to say because you've had a similar or the same argument over and over and over, okay? And and they could probably predict what you're going to say too, all right? A lot of times that, it feels like you're trapped in it, trapped in that cycle. Like, you know what, I've seen this movie before, but how do I get out of this movie is the question. And that's really central to, I think, what could be a benefit of this class is identifying these patterns and finding ways out of these patterns, okay? So, a lot of times these URPs have really quick responses, as I've written up there, knee-jerk responses. And what happens is a lot of times there's unresolved issues because you haven't dealt with conflict in an effective way. And so these unresolved issues can trigger each other. There's a term called schismogenesis that I think we've talked about already, where each one of you are triggering each other, and then of course it spirals. It escalates, and ultimately it's not an effective way to manage conflict. You don't have the transformative conflict that we've been talking about. So URPs, just a couple, I've had examples over the years. Students have talked about how their significant other is jealous and they keep having I really don't want you to talk to that person argument, or I saw you on social media with so-and-so, what's going on there? And it seems like that argument happens over and over and over. Kitchen arguments seems like are really common with students at home living with parents, and do the dishes, or living with housemates who are slobs, right? And you have those, seems like over and over. Hey, could you put your dishes in the dishwasher when the dishwasher is empty? Those kinds of discussions seem to be URPs in class. Others, parents trying to control your life. A lot of times, folks that who are just finishing high school or just kind of leaving the house, parents have a hard time letting go. And parents want to tell you what you should major in and where you should work and who your friends should be. And so maybe that's one of your URPs. That's what I hear it from my class. So there's so many. We're going to talk about domestic violence and the URPs happen where there is physical abuse. And that will be another video, but that's definitely an important URP to escape. So moving on. Hopefully you have an understanding of what we're talking about. Check in with Chapter 2 in the conflict management text. And I think that if there's other questions, either the text will answer, or I'm happy to have a Zoom appointment with you, or email me them, okay? So, your texts discuss these cycles, which are really common dysfunctional URPs. Okay? So we've talked about the communication cycle, the conflict management cycle, where there is, initiation and differentiation and, resolution. Well, here are different, dysfunctional cycles, which basically mean, obviously, this is an ineffective way to manage conflict, usually unhealthy, usually leaves you having feelings, hurts, anger that goes unresolved. So we're going to focus on the first one, the confrontation avoidance accommodation cycle. Okay? The other two will be on other videos. So let's focus on avoiding and accommodating and how that can be a harm in a relationship, okay? So the premise behind this is that we are not comfortable with conflict. I think most of us can relate to this. That conflict makes us nervous, that it manifests itself in our bodies in terms of giving us upset stomachs, headaches, tense shoulders, muscles, right? Some people even report feeling queasy. And so we avoid it until we absolutely have to deal with it. How many of you have dealt with avoiding issues because you just hate conflict and the energy that it takes, and it usually goes badly? And that's what we're talking about, avoidance and accommodate. Okay, so we put it off as long as possible. Why? We're never excited to do something that makes us anxious or nervous, at least rarely. I mean, students will report wanting to, bungee jump or skydive, but, when it comes to communication and conflict, it's not something most of us are excited about and want to tackle right away. So when you're caught in this cycle, okay, we usually leave these issues that are bothering us alone, okay? I don't want to deal with it. I'll just put away that hurt, that anger, that frustration away, okay? And then, until you can't handle it anymore, you react in the extreme. So here we have you being avoidant, cool, calm, collected in the relationship. I'm laid back. I'm not going to really cause any problems, make any waves, but there's too many things that build up until you handle it badly, you overreact, you probably say some things you don't want to say, and there you have it. You have either no reaction or an extreme reaction, which we call a false dichotomy, right? A forced choice between two extremes when there's other ways to handle it. And that other way is to, of course, assert yourself and let your feelings be known in a way that does not offend, or at least does not try not to put the other person on the defensive. So once we go through this cycle and you have that reaction of, the overreaction, well then it goes badly. It goes, obviously, when we let the anxiety build up and overreact, we're going to feel like, oh, this is conflict is horrible. You're going to have that negative perception of it again. And then you stick to this cycle. Does that sound familiar to any of you? I hope that makes sense. And there's a word for it in your textbook, and it's found its way into more pop culture, and that's gunnysacking. I've seen it on social media, people write about it, but if you imagine like a backpack, a gunny sack, and every time you deal with a conflict situation, and there's unresolved issues, there's anger, there's hurt, there's frustration, and you don't say anything, you don't deal with it, you're putting all of these things in your gunny sack, okay? And after a while, after all of that silence and not dealing with the issue, letting the other person have their way, most likely, okay? Feeling like you lost the argument, you just didn't want to deal with conflict, those angers, those hurts, will make the gunny sack explode. And then you get the overreaction. So again, you have that false dichotomy of no reaction or very little reaction, accommodating and avoiding, and then an overreaction because you can't handle it anymore, right? So there has to be another option, and there really is. So anyway, I'll give you a few other examples students talk about when they think about gunny sacking. I have people who say, oh, my significant other made me late, over and over and over, right? And it's just something I'm trying to understand, but after 17 times of making me late, I finally had to let her have it, right? Or let him have it. I've heard it both ways. Or let them have it. And so that's one of the, a significant other gunny sacking example. Also, we have managers who, I had a student who said, oh, my manager kept scheduling me during class time, and I first told him that I wanted, this Tuesday and Thursday off, right? But he keeps scheduling me. So I avoided it, I didn't even talk to him, I'm kind of, nervous to talk to him about it, and finally, after about 2 months, I went into his office and just said, I quit. I can't deal with it. School's my priority. I told you, and just exploded. And the manager said, well, I didn't know. I forgot. If you would have told me earlier. But that's, the reaction going, awry at that point in time where there's just been too many resentments, too much in the gunny sack. So another one is, oh, my housemate keeps eating my food, At first I was trying to be cool about it and just say, oh yeah, what's mine is yours. And then after a while, my housemate wouldn't buy any food, he'd just eat mine. And then he would have his friends come over and eat mine. And pretty soon I'm buying food for his friends, his significant other, and I'm going broke, and I finally just let him have it. And he thought it was out of the blue, but I couldn't deal with it for months, and now we're on the outs. So really common examples from the class with regard to gunny sacking. A little bit more about gunny sacking, which I'm imagining you all can relate to at some level. It's really obviously damaging for a relationship. You often have at least one of the party feel like, I didn't even know that was going on. This person kept their feelings about this issue, deep down and never let me know. I wish I would have known. That's pretty common when a relationship ends. If someone quits a job, or if someone breaks up with somebody and then, the one partner's left feeling like they're in the dark. Okay, that's pretty common with gunny sacking. It doesn't always happen, but students have talked about that as well as in the literature. A lot of times, it's again under the premise that conflict should be dealt with. We're afraid of conflict. Conflict should be, swept under the rug and never dealt with. Well, sometimes you can say, hey, you know what? This is not a major issue. It's neither here nor there. I'm not going to make a big deal of this. Okay? But then when things become more important to you and you keep that pattern up, and say, oh geez, we're so harmonious because we never argue. Yeah, you never argue, but you have so many needs and interests and, that are unmet. You have anger, frustration that's not vented in a healthy way. So a lot of times when people say, oh yeah, we never argue, and I've heard married couples say that, I'm always a little leery. And my first question is, well, at least to myself, because I don't verbalize it all the time, is, well, whose needs aren't being met? Whose interests aren't being met? Who's always accommodating and avoiding? Are they both accommodating and avoiding? Because, that can be a pattern where neither one of them want to deal with an issue, and it can fester and be the end of a relationship, or at least really damage it. Okay? And it's interesting, because Richardson writes about 95, that the truth is, I don't like the word abnormal, but it's not common is probably a better way to put it. Excessive conflict is really something that you probably define yourself, but if every little thing is a conflict and you're spending so much of your energy on conflict, maybe that's something that your relationship could be re-examined. But it is very important for you to be able to express your feelings, your interests and needs as well. So that's a little bit more about gunny sacking. So what do we do about it? How can we keep from gunny sacking and escape this URP, right, of avoidance and accommodation when you are dealing with a confrontation? Okay? Well, if you fall victim again and again to gunny sacking, and you let all of those resentments build up and you explode, oftentimes you're going to communicate in an aggressive way. In a way that is disrespectful, that denies the communication rights of the other person. And we'll talk about the basic communication rights right after this. But also, you're evaluating, you're really judgy, you're really oftentimes highly emotive because you have a chance to kind of vent to the person, and oftentimes it's in an aggressive way after gunny sacking for a long time. So instead, practicing assertiveness. Now this doesn't mean for every little issue you're going to assert yourself. You're probably going to pick and choose those issues that are more important to you. There's a lot of little issues maybe on a scale from 1 to 10 that are around 2, 3, 4 even, that you go, okay, I'm okay with that. We'll just let that go, let that slide. But when it becomes maybe self-esteem affecting issues like, oh my gosh, you said I was a lousy wife. That's pretty bad, right? That's something that might make you even more angry, that would make you hurt, right? So that might be higher on that scale of 1 to 10, of an issue that you need to deal with. That could be like a 9, right? And so you have to figure out, when is it time to be assertive? But also, once it is, you got to speak up for yourself, right? And that's difficult to learn. There's some skills, there's some tools that we offer in this class, the constructive complaint for one, okay? The STLC, there's various processes that will help you assert yourself. But it definitely is something that needs to be practiced just like anything, okay? And it's that other option between avoiding and accommodating and exploding and venting. Now you're asserting, you're letting the other person know, here's what I need. I need to have work be during times when I'm not in class, and hopefully that manager can help you with that. So assertiveness is, of course, not infringing upon the rights of others, not disrespecting their communication rights, and that's a really important distinction between assertive and aggressive communication, okay? Learning to assert what you need and what your interests are and assert what is important to you is obviously important in a relationship. You got to be happy with your ability to communicate what you need in a relationship. So I keep talking about these basic communication rights, and there's 15 of them in your text. And so I wrote down a little over half of them, and if you get to page 83 in your textbook, it'll go more into depth. But in Con and Abigail, chapter 4, they cite Lee's book about basic communication rights, and they list things that we really need to kind of assert. Make sure these rights aren't being disrespected. And also, when we're communicating, make sure we're not disrespecting other people's rights, because then we are communicating aggressively. Okay? So, be listened to and taken seriously. First right you have, hey, would you listen to me? Okay? A lot of times people feel like, oh, the person's on their phone. They're not even listening, and you feel like, wow, that's pretty disrespectful. And really, this is about respect. Say no, refuse requests, and turn down invitations essentially without feeling guilty. And a lot of times people are motivated by guilt. I think this is very cultural. Maybe you were raised in a family culture where guilt was used pretty effectively, at least for your parent or parents. And that's a right, is for you to say, hey, you know what, I can't do it right now. This is something you should be able to assert. And we've talked about being treated as an adult, not being spoken down to, being treated with respect, and then of course when you're communicating with others, not infringing on their right to being treated with respect. Expect that others won't talk to you in a condescending way. Okay, we've gone over the Dr. Gottman's 4 horsemen of the apocalypse in a conflict sense, and contempt. Remember that notion of when someone speaks down to you as if they are on a higher plane than you, that's really one of the most damaging things to a relationship. If that happens over and over, that can damage your relationship, but not only that, your long-term health. So, speak to me as if I'm an adult, speak to me with respect. And another basic communication right that Con and Abigail have in the text is not to be forced to feel, how others want you to feel. And that sometimes, I think I hear this from students a lot, that my parents want me to perceive the world as they do. They want me to have the same interests, the same values, the same career goals as they do. They want me to be a nurse, I don't want to be a nurse, right? And so that's another right, another communication right, is to be able to adopt your own values, right? Another one, and this is right in the way of, right in line with number 5, is being able to have your own feelings, opinions. Okay, have you ever been in an argument where the other person's really upset because you don't see, you don't share their opinion about something? I've heard so many examples about politics, right? And how if you don't share my opinion, well then something's wrong with you, and I'm not going to respect you, kind of thing. And that's, I think, pretty common. To meet other people and talk to them, okay? And this is with the URP of, a lot of times with jealousy in relationships, people will say, no, I don't ever want you to talk to that person, right? Because I feel jealous when you speak to that person. I don't ever want to see you with, that person on social media. Whatever it is, you have the right to talk to people, right? That's all you're doing is talking. We have to address trust, but at least you should have the right to talk to people. Have others leave you alone if you wish, okay? And then in conflict, you've probably had those arguments where, hey, I need to step out for a second, okay? I need to take a break just to control my anger, to settle down so I don't say anything that I don't really mean, okay? Well, maybe you've been in arguments where that person doesn't leave you alone. That person's going to follow you around the house. That person's going to, be texting you constantly. It's a communication right, okay? So there's 7 more that are written about. Take a look at page 83 in your textbook. I think these are really, if we could all live by these, we would definitely have more transformative conflicts as opposed to conflicts that really spiral and are detrimental to us. So this is the introduction to URPs. We're going to build on this conversation with other videos, lectures, discussions, discussion boards, and I hope you understand. If there's anything you have or anything that you see is unclear or need me to expand on, please zoom in or email me, and I'm very happy to go over this material again. And have a good day. Thank you.